Hey folks, in this week's lesson, I'm going to show you how to paint an exotic bird using watercolor. This is really fun to do, and if you want an outline version, head on over to Patreon to grab your download. If you're going to print it off that, make sure you print it on watercolor paper because you can't do it on normal paper. So grab your watercolors and let's get started. Grab your materials team. We'll need watercolor paper, a rubber, a pencil, a brush, your paints, some water and a rag. So let's start with the outline. The trick is trying to make sure it fits on the page and it doesn't get too big. So in order to do that, the most important thing for me is figuring out the beak. So how big the beak is going to be. And I'm just going to do a rough sketch. There's nothing perfect or permanent. So I'm just going to throw this on because then I have something to work with. It helps me to figure out the size, whether anything needs a major or minor change, and then hopefully that will just be much easier. So once I've done my sketch, I'm just going to go over it with a bit of a finer brush. What is the phrase? I don't know. And then I'm going to start to think about the shapes a little bit better. So does it curve a little bit more, a little bit less? Can I add a bit of detail to help me recognize the drawing much better? So this is a time for you to maybe pause the video or watch it all the way through and then continue with yours, because it will take maybe slightly more, maybe slightly less time than mine. So give yourself whatever time you need. And if that's all you do today, the outline, fantastic. It means you've set yourself up for success tomorrow. So I'm just going to speed this up and you can see the result much quicker. A lot of you ask if we will ever remove the pencil. The likelihood is no, we won't. But what I do want you to do at this stage is make sure you've rubbed out any lines that you don't want. So if you've been quite sketchy here, you might just want to rub out the inside of any messy lines, because that could show through the painting. Otherwise, our paint will go to the edge, so it's really not an issue at all. Let's look at a mixture of colors. So grab a scrap piece of paper so we can just play with different types of green on there before we commit to the painting. All right, so I've got a scrap piece of paper. There's a bit of gunk on it already. But first of all, I just want to play around with some colors. So I'm going to choose these greens and just decide which ones I like, which ones I don't. But they always look different when you mix them as well. So why don't I choose this green and this green and see if I like that. Not really, but let's try these two. Nice, so that's a nice average green. And then I'll try those other two together. You see how different those three look? It's insane. Let's introduce a little bit of blue. So let's mix that blue and that green. Not bad, a little bit tealy. What about the other blue and the other green? Maybe this green and this blue. Maybe this green and this blue. Okay, so there's a huge amount of combinations in here. We could also try a couple of blacks and greens. And we'll get more olivey colors. Maybe let's try this one and this one. Nice. Maybe that one and that one. Okay, good. So thinking about the colors I like, we're going to go for this one. That one's quite nice. That one. Ooh, I'm tempted by this one, you know, to maybe pick up the color a bit, because they're a little bit dull, so I'm not sure about that one. Maybe this one. And I want to have those in mind, so it could be a good idea to start just to write down what you did. So dark green plus dark blue, or light green plus black. And that way you know exactly what colors it took to mix those together. So we're going to work wet on wet. And that means I want my paper to be wet. And then I want my brush to introduce a wet color as well. So first of all, I'm just going to paint a little bit around the bird. maybe like the odd drop that escapes as if it's been splashed by paint. And I'm not going to do the whole thing because it will start to dry by the time I get there. And then I just want to make sure I have a color ready. So I'm going to go for these two together because that's a nice average green. And you see how juicy it is, how wet it is. And then I just want to add some dots into the paint. I can actually paint along the side of the bird just to make sure it's nice and crisp. And then I also want to add another color. So why don't I introduce a bit of blue? Get that along the edges maybe. And the trick is to not overwork it. So the more we let science do its thing, the more natural it's going to look. The only thing I really want to do is make sure I'm going around it and it's nice and close to the bird, but then I'm just leaving it be. So I can really play with the texture, the darkness, the lightness, and I might even decide to go for another color afterwards when it dries, but for now I'm just going to leave it at that and work my way around. So if you've got a natural break on the bark, it makes a lot more sense to follow around the head. So let's just get more of this splash effect. It's okay if the paint's pulling the color around. So let's do the same thing again. Remember team, don't overwork it, let it dry, and let's look at it once it's dry, because it could look a bit too light, could look a little bit too dark. We can't do anything either because inside the bird, if we paint, it's gonna all bleed out. So let it dry, grab a cup of tea, grab a snack. So first I'm checking the area to make sure it's dry. It has to be the same temperature as the paper around it. So if it does feel the same, then voila, it's ready. Next, I am just going to make it a little bit damp so it's less wet than last time, which means it just gives me an extra second to paint on it, and the blend will be nice as well. So once I've done that, I can go over that black section, and then I'm going to pick up a yellow. So pop my yellow in here, and then I'm just going to paint the top. So it's just pure yellow. You'll see it's pulling down already. And then I'm just gonna get an orange. Just get that in there. And then I'm just gonna go orange a little bit further down, and then the final color will be a red. Get that ready. Paint that at the bottom. Not gonna lie, this looks sick. Okay team, so I'm gonna skip a section because I don't want any bleeding, so I'm actually just gonna skip that black line on the nose, and I'm gonna do the black bit on the back of the head. So all I'm gonna do, pick up that black, I'm gonna go directly from the pigment this time, and then just paint that in. Then on the shoulder, because it has a little bit of light from the sky, I'm actually going to use this blue. So just get a nice amount of blue, again straight from the pigment. Check the neighbours are dry, and then all I'm going to do is paint a little bit of blue on here, a little bit on there, and then I'm going to go straight into black. So I just want to work fairly quick just to make sure there's no harsh edges. And this black, if you leave it thin, it's gonna start to turn grey. So that means we want our pigment to be nice and thick, but I can go back to it. For now, I just want to get a good coverage, and we want it to really stand out against the background. So the darker and thicker it is, the better it will look. So paint in your feathers. We can't see any other detail, so let's just do this top section first. And then the tail, we do have a little bit of light, so I'm just going to do a very light blue, very thin as well, and I'm hoping by the time I actually get to it, it's going to be a little bit drier. So once I've done that, I'm going to pick up my black and just continue that along down here. As always team, let it dry and let's come back to it in a second. Maybe it's time for snack number 2. Let's add a little something in the face. So I want this to be quite light, and I don't want it to be super bright. So I'm actually going to go for bit more of a yellow ochre and make it really, really thin. So that means adding more water. By all means, do a little test patch on your scrap piece of paper first. Otherwise, let's go straight for it. So it's a little bit dirty from the greens. Maybe I need to change my water, but you know what? We're going to work with it. I'm going to clean my brush, and then I'm just going to try and spread that down a little bit more. So let's get some of that yellow ochre down at the bottom. Just let the science happen, my friends. That should hopefully dry and spread a lovely bit of gradient down. So actually I'm just going to make that a little bit darker. I can see that the water is nice and even, so as that pulls down, that's going to dry really smooth. I think at the same time, I'm just going to do a little black bit in here because it's not touching anything else. And that's another thing done, as well as this edge. I'm always trying to find ways to get a little step ahead. So I like to just use the tip of my brush here because it's the same as a pen really if you don't push down. And then we get this lovely crisp line. And on the snout, we also have that black as well. So my brush is splaying a little bit, so I just want to make sure I don't get any extra hairy lines anywhere. And I'm just going to fill that in. As that's drying, let's move down to the bark. So I'm feeling a bit of a purple for this. I'm not sure why I put it in there, but actually mixing it with a little bit of blue and a little bit of ochre, it just makes it a bit more branchy. And then I just want to pop this on here. So it's fairly wet at the moment. And let's go along the whole thing. And I'm going to try and do a bit of a shadow underneath. So I've gone for a light layer on top, and then we're going to mix my purple with a dark blue. A bit too much there we go. And it's a bit thicker, and then all I want to do is skirt around the bottom. Because it's still wet, it's going to blend really nicely down there. So give that a couple of mins, and we'll be on our final section. All right, quick assessment. She's looking pretty sick, but she's lacking a bit of colour. So I'm going to redo the mouth, and I'm going to do that same thing again, where I'm just going to dampen, trying to get too much purple in it, dampen the mouth, and then let's go for yellow on the top, orange in the middle, then a little bit of red at the bottom. Whilst that's drying, team, I'm just going to get a nice light blue and go around the eye. And then on the feet, I'll use that same blue and I'll just spread that across here. Same on this toe there. And then the bottom of the feet will be a little bit darker, so I'll just pick up a darker blue and just plodge that on there. Maybe a little line going through the toes. So the final thing I want to do is just make sure my black is black enough and strong enough, because when things dry in watercolors, they dry a little bit more pastel. So let's just go over the black one more time, and it'll just help to push that contrast even stronger for the colors and make the colors stand out. And then that, my friends, should be a beautiful exotic bird. Done. So let's finish this and we'll have a look at the end. I lied. There's one more thing I want to do, which is just add some bright patches of colour. So I'm just going to go a little bit of wet on wet again, if I can just get rid of that ugly bit of string. And then I'm just going to introduce a few dots, literally just like that, of the light green, because this will just help to pick up the brightness a little bit in the painting. It's a little bit dark, so make sure everything's nice and wet. Let's do the same up here as well. Lovely, juicy, bright colours. Okay, then any touch-ups, team, that you need to do. For example, this, game changer. This is the time to do it. I'm going to let it dry and we're going to have a look together. Okay team, there we have it, an exotic bird in watercolour that hopefully wasn't too stressful. So well done, and I'll catch you in the next video.